July 10, 1943, about 2:45, southern coast of Sicily, Italy. The Mediterranean night is torn apart not by the storm that had raged only hours before, but by the synchronized roar of naval artillery and the drone of thousands of engines. In the darkness, the sea is black, but the horizon is alive with the artificial lightning of war. This is the moment the Axis powers have feared, yet failed to predict with certainty. Out in the chop of the Gulf of Gela, and stretching along the southeastern spine of the island, an armada of staggering proportions maneuvers through the swells. There are 3,200 ships in this fleet, a steel bridge spanning from North Africa to Europe. Aboard these vessels wait 150,000 men, soldiers of the United States 7th Army and the British 8th Army. In terms of initial boots on the ground, this operation, codenamed Husky, eclipses what will happen in Normandy a year later. It is the largest amphibious undertaking the world has ever seen to date. Leading the American contingent is Lieutenant General George S. Patton, a man whose aggressive doctrine is about to be tested against the fortified coastline of Fortress Europe. To his east, General Bernard Montgomery commands the British 8th Army. Their objective is simple on the map but brutal in execution: seize the island of Sicily, secure the shipping lanes of the Mediterranean, and kick open the door to the Italian mainland. But as the landing craft cut the water, churning toward the beaches of Gela, Licata, and Scaglietti, the element of surprise they enjoy is the product of a macabre theater of the absurd played out months prior. Back in April, off the coast of Spain, the British Royal Navy had released a submarine-launched canister containing the body of a man dressed as a Royal Marine officer. In his pockets were false invasion plans, carefully drafted to mislead the German High Command. This was Operation Mincemeat. The ruse worked. The documents convinced Berlin that the Allied blow would fall on Sardinia or Greece. As the Allied armada approached Sicily, German Field Marshal Albert Kesselring and the Italian command were looking the wrong way, their reinforcements scattered across the Mediterranean basin, guarding against ghosts. But deception only buys time. It does not buy safety. As the ramps drop at H hour, the reality of the assault replaces the theory of the planning rooms. The U.S. 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, veterans of North Africa, storm the beaches at Gela. They know the sound of incoming fire. Flanking them near Scaglietti is the U.S. 45th Infantry Division, the Thunderbirds. These men are different. They are National Guardsmen from Oklahoma, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona. For the 45th, this is not another chapter, it is the opening line. They are a green unit, stepping off the landing craft with no prior combat experience straight into the fire of a defended hostile shore. The resistance is uneven but sharp. The Italian 6th Army under General Alfredo Gazzoni commands the island's defense, manning coastal pillboxes and machine gun nests. But the true teeth of the defense lie in reserve, the German mechanized units, specifically the Panzer Division, Hermann Göring. By dawn on July 10, the beachhead is a chaotic sprawl of men, jeeps, and crates. The logistical feat is immense. In the first 3 days alone, the U.S. Army and Navy will move 66,285 personnel, 7,396 vehicles, and nearly 18,000 tons of cargo across the surf. But the Luftwaffe has not ceded the sky. Off the coast of Gela, the destroyer USS Maddox is patrolling the anti-submarine screen, protecting the vulnerable transport ships unloading the lifeblood of the invasion. The Maddox, a Gleaves-class destroyer, is a greyhound of the ocean, built for speed and screening. But speed is no defense against a vertical stoop. A German Ju-88 dive bomber, slipping through the fighter cover, rolls over and screams down toward the destroyer. The anti-aircraft gunners on the Maddox track the bird, the air filling with the sharp crack of 5-inch and 20-mm fire, but the German pilot holds his line. A single heavy bomb strikes the ship. It is a catastrophic hit, piercing the steel deck and detonating in the aft magazine. The explosion breaks the destroyer's back. The violence is absolute. There is no time for damage control, no time for orderly evacuation. In less than 2 minutes, the Maddox rolls and slips beneath the surface of the Mediterranean. 212 crewmen are lost in the blink of an eye, entombed in the iron hull. It is a stark reminder to the thousands of soldiers watching from the beaches. The crossing is over, but the dying has just begun. On shore, the situation at Gela is becoming critical. The Hermann Göring Division, realizing the deception too late to stop the landing, launches a ferocious counterattack on July 11. They are not waiting for the Americans to organize. German Mark III and Mark IV tanks, supported by infantry, surge toward the beaches, threatening to push the 1st Infantry Division back into the sea. The American infantry, digging into the soft sand and scrub, lack the heavy anti-tank guns needed to stop the armor. The panzers roll over the dunes, their 75 guns hammering the frantic defensive lines. It is a crisis point. If the Germans break through to the water, the invasion could collapse before it truly begins. Salvation comes from the sea. The cruisers and destroyers sitting offshore, including the USS Boise and USS Savannah, swing their turrets toward the land. Directed by shore fire control parties radioing amidst the chaos of the tank attack, the warships unleash a barrage of 6-inch naval gunfire. The shells roar overhead like freight trains, slamming into the German tank formations with pinpoint accuracy. The heavy naval rounds crack the armor of the panzers and shatter the infantry formations. The Hermann Göring Division, battered by an enemy they cannot reach, is forced to withdraw. The beachhead holds, but the chaos of battle breeds confusion, and confusion in modern war is a lethal, indiscriminate force. As the sun sets on July 11, the invasion force is on edge. The Luftwaffe has been pounding the fleet and the beaches all day. Nerves are frayed. Every engine sound in the dark is assumed to be a German bomber. The timing could not be worse. Overhead, the drone of engines returns, but these are not the Junkers or Heinkels that have harried the fleet since dawn. Approaching the invasion corridor are 144 C-47 transport planes, lumbering low and slow in the moonlight. Inside sit the paratroopers of the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment, part of the 82nd Airborne Division, arriving to reinforce the beachhead. They are flying a designated safety corridor, a path cleared by high command. But down in the chop, on the decks of the Liberty ships and destroyers, and in the foxholes along the dunes, the gunners are exhausted, terrified, and trigger-happy. A single machine gun opens up, perhaps from a ship, perhaps from the shore. No one will ever know for certain. But in the dark, tracer fire is contagious. Within seconds, the entire Allied armada erupts. A wall of steel and incendiary rounds rises to meet the friendly aircraft. The slow-moving transports, silhouetted against the stars, are torn apart. Pilots frantically fire recognition flares, but they are lost in the kaleidoscope of flak. It is a massacre of their own making. 23 C-47s spiral into the sea or crash into the Sicilian hills. By the time the guns fall silent, 318 American paratroopers and aircrew are dead or wounded, victims of the fog of war that hangs thick over the Mediterranean. As the shock of the friendly fire incident settles, the reality of the ground war sets in. The invasion moves inland, away from the cooling breeze of the coast and into the rugged, sun-baked interior. Sicily in July is a furnace. Temperatures soar and the dust chokes engines and men alike. The enemy is not just the German or Italian soldier, but the island itself. Malaria begins to stalk the ranks, eventually felling over 10,000 Allied troops, more than enemy bullets. On the American left flank, the green troops of the 45th Infantry Division, the Thunderbirds, are pushing toward the Biscari airfield. These National Guardsmen are learning the brutal arithmetic of combat in real time. The fighting is vicious, often at close quarters against determined German rearguards. The psychological strain on these unblooded soldiers is immense, compounded by the relentless heat and the aggressive rhetoric of their commanders who have demanded ruthlessness. On July 14, near the Biscari airfield, this tension snaps. In two separate incidents that will stain the campaign's legacy, soldiers from the 45th Division capture Axis troops who have surrendered. The laws of war are clear, but in the dust and adrenaline of the moment, discipline evaporates. In one instance, an American sergeant lines up prisoners in a shallow gully. In another, A captain orders Italians to be marched to the rear, only for the sound of machine gun fire to echo back moments later. When the dust settles, approximately 73 unarmed Italian and German prisoners of war lie dead. The Biscari massacre is a dark testament to the dehumanizing velocity of the invasion. General Omar Bradley, commanding the Second Corps, is notified, but the incident is largely hushed up to maintain morale. The courts-martial quietly processed while the war grinds on. While the infantry bleeds for every mile of dusty road, the strategic picture is shifting. The original Allied plan called for a methodical advance, with Montgomery's British Eighth Army driving up the east coast toward Messina to cut off the Axis escape, while Patton's Seventh Army acted as a shield on the left. But Montgomery has stalled. The terrain south of Mount Etna is a nightmare of lava rock and narrow roads, and the Germans have turned it into a fortress. Patton, a man who views a supporting role as a personal insult, sees an opportunity. He looks west. The port city of Palermo lies on the northern coast, a jewel that would grant the Americans a major harbor and a headline-grabbing victory. Patton unleashes his armor and infantry in a sweeping hook, turning the Seventh Army loose. It is a blitzkrieg in reverse, Americans tearing across the Sicilian countryside. On July 22, Patton's forces roll into Palermo. The population, weary of Mussolini's wars and battered by Allied bombing, greets the Americans not as conquerors, but largely as liberators. The capture of Palermo is a masterstroke of publicity and logistics, proving the Seventh Army is no mere shield. The shockwaves of the invasion travel north, crossing the Strait of Messina and penetrating the walls of the Villa Savia in Rome. The loss of Sicily is the final indictment of Benito Mussolini's disastrous leadership. On the night of July 24, the Grand Council of Fascism meets. In a room thick with betrayal, Mussolini is voted out of power by his own lieutenants. By the next day, Il Duce is arrested. The dictator who dreamed of a new Roman Empire is toppled not by a coup in Rome, but by the boots of Allied soldiers marching through Sicilian dust. Yet, the war in Sicily does not end with Mussolini. The Germans, under Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, are now effectively fighting alone, and they are masters of the fighting withdrawal. They establish a defensive line known as the Etna Line, using the massive volcano as a pivot point. The terrain heavily favors the defender: steep ridges, deep ravines, and winding roads where a single 88 anti-tank gun can hold up a battalion for hours. The stress of breaking this line begins to tell on everyone, from the rifleman to the army commander. General Patton, driving himself and his men relentlessly to beat Montgomery to Messina, visits the 15th Evacuation Hospital near Nicosia on August 3. He walks among the wounded, the air heavy with the smell of antiseptic and gangrene. He stops at the bed of Private Charles H. Cool. Cool has no visible wounds. He sits slumped, exhausted, diagnosed with battle fatigue. To Patton, a man steeped in the romantic warrior ethos of a bygone era, this is incomprehensible. He sees not a casualty of psychological trauma, but a coward. Patton slaps the soldier with his gloves, verbally abusing him and ordering him back to the front. A week later, on August 10, it happens again. At the 93rd Evacuation Hospital, Patton encounters Private Paul G. Bennett shivering with malaria and nerves. Patton explodes. He slaps Bennett, draws his pistol, and threatens to shoot the man. These incidents, when they reach the ears of General Eisenhower, threaten to end Patton's career. They reveal the jagged edge of command in a war of attrition, where the pressure to win clashes violently with the human limit of endurance. As the Allies hammer against the Etna Line, the Germans initiate one of the most remarkable logistical feats of the war, Operation Leogang. General Hans Valentin Hube, commanding the German forces, realizes Sicily is lost. His new objective is to save his army to fight on the Italian mainland. The Strait of Messina is a narrow ribbon of water, barely 2 miles wide at its tightest point, separating the jagged coast of Sicily from the toe of the Italian boot. For General Hans Valentin Hube, this bottleneck is the only way out. Beginning on August 11, the German commander initiates Operation Leogang, a masterclass in retrograde warfare that will be studied by military academies for decades. While the Allies bicker over prestige and struggle through the lava fields of Mount Etna, Hube turns the strait into one of the most heavily defended corridors on Earth. He masses anti-aircraft batteries on both shores, German 88s and lighter 20 cannons, creating a flak alley so dense that Allied pilots describe flying through it as suicide. Under this umbrella of steel, a fleet of ferries, barges, and small craft begins to shuttle back and forth, day and night. The Allies have total air superiority, with 4,000 aircraft in the theater and sorties running around 1,200 a day, yet they cannot seal the gap. The Royal Navy and U.S. Navy, wary of the coastal batteries that can punch through destroyer armor, largely stay back. This hesitation allows the Wehrmacht to conduct a methodical evacuation that defies the chaotic crumbling of the Italian political state. They do not just move men, they move an army. Over the course of 6 nights, Hube successfully transports 39,569 German soldiers and roughly 62,000 Italian troops to the mainland. More impressively, they take their teeth with them. 9,065 vehicles, 27 tanks, and 94 heavy artillery pieces are ferried across right under the noses of the Allied air forces. On the ground, the race to catch them becomes a contest of ego as much as strategy. General Patton, stung by the slap incidents and desperate to prove the American soldiers' mettle against Montgomery's veterans, drives the U.S. 7th Army relentlessly along the northern coast. The terrain is a nightmare of ridges and ravines, where the retreating Germans blow every bridge and mine every culvert. The U.S. 3rd Infantry Division, acting as Patton's spearhead, learns to fight a war of engineers, rebuilding the road as they march, often under mortar fire. They launch a series of small amphibious end runs behind German lines, hoping to cut off the retreat, but the German rearguard is disciplined and lethal. They trade space for time, holding a ridge just long enough to force the Americans to deploy, then slipping away before the artillery can zero in. By mid-August, the campaign has devolved into a frantic sprint. Montgomery's 8th Army is grinding up the eastern coast, bogged down by the difficult terrain south of Messina and the tenacious defense of the Hermann Göring Division remnants. Patton, sensing victory in the inter-Allied rivalry, pushes his commanders to the breaking point. "I want you to get into Messina just as fast as you can," he orders. "I don't want you to waste time." The implication is clear. Beating the British is now a primary objective. On the morning of August 17, 1943, the silence finally returns to the Sicilian hills. The last German boat has slipped away across the strait hours before, leaving behind only wrecked equipment and the smell of cordite. At roughly 1,000 a.m., a patrol from the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division enters the outskirts of Messina. They find a city battered by bombing but free of enemy troops. Patton enters the city shortly after, riding in a command car with sirens wailing, dust caking his uniform. He has won his race. When a British officer from the 8th Army finally links up with the Americans later that day, the tension is palpable, but the result is indisputable. The Americans have taken the prize. The conquest of Sicily is complete, ending a campaign that lasted exactly 38 days. In that short, violent summer, the strategic map of the war has been rewritten. The Mediterranean sea lanes are finally secure for Allied shipping. Beneath, Mussolini, the first of the fascist dictators, has been swept from the board. The soft underbelly of Europe has been pierced, but the cost of this education has been steep. The U.S. 7th Army has suffered 2,811 killed in action and 6,471 wounded. The British and Canadians have paid a similar price. Beyond the combat casualties, the island itself has waged war on the invaders. Malaria and heat exhaustion have incapacitated over 10,000 men, thinning the ranks of experienced units just as they are needed most. However, as the dust settles on the rubble of Messina, a sobering realization takes hold in the Allied headquarters. The victory is geographic but not total. General Hube's successful evacuation means that over 100,000 seasoned Axis troops, including the core of the formidable German panzer and parachute units, have escaped to fight another day. These are the same men who will man the defensive lines in the mountains of Italy, turning the peninsula into a grinding slaughterhouse for the next 2 years. The failure to close the trap at the Strait of Messina is a blunder that will be paid for in blood at places like Salerno, Anzio, and Monte Cassino. For the soldiers of the 1st, 3rd, 9th, and 45th Divisions, there is little time to analyze the strategic nuances. They stand on the docks of Messina, looking across the narrow strip of water at the purple haze of the Italian mainland. They know the war is not over, it has simply crossed the street. The invasion of Sicily was the testing ground, the place where the U.S. Army came of age, shedding its amateur status in the harsh school of combat. They have faced the panzers at Gela, the friendly fire at the beachhead, and the moral precipice at Biscari. Now they look north, where the fortress of Europe still stands, waiting. That fortress, however, had already been compromised long before the first boot hit the sand at Gela, breached not by high explosives, but by a phantom. As the troops rest their rifles and gaze across the Strait of Messina, the true scale of the strategic victory begins to emerge from the classified files of British naval intelligence. The successful foothold in Sicily, which allowed Patton and Montgomery to drive the Axis into the sea, was purchased with one of the most audacious deceptions in military history, Operation Mincemeat. Back in April, while the invasion force was still drilling in North Africa, a British submarine, the HMS Seraph, surfaced quietly in the pre-dawn darkness off the coast of Huelva, Spain. On deck, the crew moved with the hushed urgency of men handling a volatile explosive, though their cargo was inert. They hauled a canister from the casing, opened it, and slid the body of a man into the black water. He was dressed in the uniform of a Royal Marine Major, a briefcase chained to his wrist, his pockets stuffed with theater tickets, love letters, and a meticulously forged identity card bearing the name William Martin. As the submarine slipped back beneath the waves, the wash pushed the corpse toward the Spanish shore, where the currents and the German intelligence network would do the rest. This was the macabre genius of British naval intelligence, a plan designed to exploit the paranoia of the Axis High Command. When the body washed ashore, the secret documents in the briefcase, letters from high-ranking British generals suggesting an invasion of Greece and Sardinia, found their way to Berlin. The deception was swallowed whole. Adolf Hitler, convinced the Allies would strike the Balkans, diverted panzer divisions to Greece and sent Rommel to Athens. Crucially, he moved torpedo boats and minefields away from Sicily. The 150,000 men who had stormed the beaches of Gela and Sciglitti owed their lives, in part, to a dead man floating in the Atlantic. The Phantom Major had thinned the defenses just enough to allow Patton and Montgomery to gain a foothold. But deception only buys the first 24 hours. Steel and grit must purchase the rest. As the smoke clears over the ruins of Messina in late August 1943, the Allied commanders begin to take stock of what that purchase actually cost. The ledger is grim. The 38 days of combat have claimed nearly 25,000 Allied casualties, killed, wounded, or captured. The American 7th Army alone has lost nearly 9,000 men, but the casualty lists tell only half the story. The medical tents are overflowing not just with shrapnel wounds, but with the delirious, shivering victims of the island's other defender, the Anopheles mosquito. The Sicily campaign becomes a massive epidemiological case study. In the lowlands around Catania and the swampy river deltas near Gela, malaria has struck with the force of a biological weapon. At the height of the campaign, admissions for malaria and sandfly fever actually exceed admissions for battle wounds. The entire 1st Infantry Division, the legendary Big Red One, is decimated by the disease, with thousands of riflemen rendered combat ineffective, shaking uncontrollably in field hospitals while their comrades push north. The medical corps is overwhelmed, forcing a rapid evolution in battlefield medicine. The use of Atabrine tablets becomes as mandatory as ammunition, and the logistical chain for blood plasma and penicillin is tested to its breaking point. Sicily teaches the U.S. Army that in the Mediterranean theater, geography and biology are enemies as lethal as the Wehrmacht. Yet, for the survivors, the transformation is absolute. The 45th Infantry Division, the Thunderbirds, who had waded ashore near Sicily as Green National Guardsmen, are now hardened veterans. They have learned the dark arts of survival, how to distinguish the rip of a German MG-42 from the chatter of an American Browning, how to spot the telltale disturbance of a mine in the dust, and how to live without sleep, hot food, or mercy. They have shed their amateur status in the rugged hills of the interior. The price of this education was the loss of innocence, exemplified by the horrors at Biscari, but the result is a fighting force that is now equal to the Germans in tactical proficiency. The campaign also serves as the great laboratory for the invasion of France, still a year away. The mistakes made on the beaches of Sicily will save thousands of lives on the beaches of Normandy. The tragic friendly fire incident over Gela forces a complete overhaul of airborne operations. Never again will transport planes fly over an invasion fleet without rigid time slots and distinct invasion stripes painted on their wings and fuselages, black and white bands that will become iconic on D-Day. Logistically, the invasion proves the worth of new amphibious technology. The Duck, a six-wheeled amphibious truck, makes its combat debut here. Initially viewed with skepticism by the brass, the Duck proves invaluable, ferrying supplies from ships directly to inland dumps, bypassing the congested and sabotage-prone ports. The landing ship, Tank LSD, the ugly, flat-bottomed workhorse of the fleet, proves it can deliver heavy armor directly onto a hostile shore. Eisenhower and his staff observe these innovations with growing confidence, realizing that the solution to breaching Hitler's Atlantic Wall has been found in the waters of the Mediterranean. No longer tethered to the immediate capture of deep-water ports, the Allies now possess the mechanical means to sustain a massive continental invasion. With the island secured and the blueprint for victory established, the focus shifts north to the Italian mainland and the grinding campaign to come. If you would like more war stories from World War II, please like this video and subscribe to our channel.